Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my top 20 quarterbacks and tight ends in the exact same video for week number 2 of the 2022 fantasy football season. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do hit a like on today's video. It would help us out a ton. And if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at notorious FNTSY. I would also like to ask that if you guys do have any questions about week number 2 fantasy football, to please make sure that you ask down below in the comment section. And I also do not include any of the quarterbacks or tight ends that already played on Thursday, because they already played and you can't now just magically insert them into your lineup. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We begin with the quarterbacks headlined by Josh Allen, quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, going up against the Tennessee Titans in the first game on Monday Night Football in Tennessee. Last week up against the LA Rams, Josh Allen absolutely fucking demolished their defense. 26 completions on 31 attempts, 297 passing yards, 10 rushes for 56 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and he finished as the number 2 quarterback at the end of the week. This week, he goes up against the Tennessee Titans defense, and while the defense looked all right up against the pass against Daniel Jones, Josh Allen is a whole nother level of a beast, and the Tennessee Titans, honestly, the defense stands really no chance up against Josh Allen, so don't be surprised at all if he finishes as the number 1 quarterback at the end of the week. Next up, we move to Russell Wilson of the Denver Broncos this week, facing up against the Houston Texans at home in Mile High Stadium. Last week up against the Seattle Seahawks, things weren't the best for Russ. Now, as a quarterback, like in real life, he actually did pretty good, right? He had 340 passing yards, 29 completions on 42 attempts. He rushed the ball once. He threw a passing touchdown, didn't have any interceptions, but he only scored 18 fantasy points and finished as the quarterback number 14. Again, not a bad game. The reason why the Broncos lost was because Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon have fucking butterfingers, and they both fumbled the ball on the goal line. But this week, they go up against Houston. And I know last week up against the Seattle Seahawks, on paper, that matchup should have been incredibly easy for Russell Wilson, and the guy should have thrown like 3 passing touchdowns, but Nathaniel Hackett is a stooge. They should have passed the ball more, and at the end of the day, they lose the game. But now up against the Houston Texans, now we have a legitimately easy matchup. Now, I know, Nick, the Colts ended up actually not playing the greatest up against the Texans. But to me, the Denver Broncos are on a whole nother fucking level compared to the Indianapolis Colts. So I think Russell Wilson has a very solid performance. And honestly, he could be the number 1 quarterback at the end of the week. Next up, we move to Jalen Hurts, quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. Last week, up against the Detroit Lions, he went 18 of 32 for 243 passing yards, 17 rushes for 90 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, 25 fantasy points, and he finished the week as the quarterback number 4. Now, he's going up against the Vikings, which from last week up against the Packers, the Minnesota Vikings defense looked amazing. They look like one of the best defenses in the NFL, but in reality, I think Aaron Rodgers and the Packers offense just had an extremely bad game, and I don't think that is very telling of the fact that the Minnesota Vikings defense is this defense that you need to fear. Jalen Hurts is so good because of how much rushing upside he had. Like I said, this man rushed the ball 17 times for 90 yards on Sunday up against the Lions. Up against the Vikings, I'm sure they're going to try to stop him from running the ball, but at the end of the day, he's just going to keep doing it. He's going to keep gaining yards, and Jalen Hurts is incredibly safe in this matchup in what could be a very high-scoring back-and-forth affair, especially with how not so hot the Eagles' defense looked, despite on paper them looking very good. They didn't look too good up against the Detroit Lions. At number 4, we got Lamar Jackson, quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Miami Dolphins at home in Baltimore on Sunday. Last week up against the Jets in MetLife, we didn't really see the same Lamar that we're used to. He only rushed the ball 6 times for 17 yards, but he threw 3 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, finishing as the quarterback 8 at the end of the week. Now, up against the Jets, that was a matchup where I feel like Lamar was just trying to show off. He wants that big contract. Look, guys, I can throw the ball. I'm not a running back. All those jokes about how Lamar's a running back, he's like, fuck it, up against the Jets, that soft-ass defense, let me just throw some bombs. And he played amazing in that game throwing the football. Up against the Miami Dolphins, this matchup does definitely concern me. I'm not in love with this matchup because Lamar got blitzed a million times by the Dolphins last time these two teams played last season. Now, Does that mean that Lamar is going to struggle again? I don't necessarily think so. I think he has a decent game, but if you wanted to talk me into starting, say, Kyler Murray or Derek Carr ahead of Lamar Jackson, then I wouldn't argue with you. But at the end of the day, these guys are so very close in my rankings, but I would slightly lean with Lamar Jackson, even up against a tough Miami Dolphins defense. And hey, maybe I'm a Dolphins fan. Maybe the Dolphins defense is just overrated and the Patriots offense is just really bad, because the Patriots offense could not get anything going. They were in need of a Viagra last week. Next up, we move to Kyler Murray, the short king quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Las Vegas Raiders in Las Vegas at 4:25 Eastern Standard Time. Last week up against Kansas City, this was a matchup. This was basically my game of the week. I was so excited for this game. The Arizona offense that normally looks amazing, normally causes fireworks early on in the season, versus the Chiefs, one of the best offenses in the NFL, and Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals fell flat on their face. Now, at the end of the week, Kyler Murray was quarterback 9, so he didn't really screw you over. He didn't throw any interceptions, but he also didn't run the ball much, only 5 rushes. He only had 193 passing yards. This week, up against the Las Vegas Raiders, I expect Kyler Murray to look a little bit better. I think this offense as a whole is going to look good, and this does definitely have all the makings of a very high-scoring back-and-forth affair. At number 6, we have the other quarterback in this game, Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders. Derek Carr did not look very good last week up against the Chargers. 22 completions on 37 attempts, 295 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, but he threw 3 interceptions, 17 fantasy points, quarterback 17 at the end of the week. Now, definitely the Chargers defense is much better than the Arizona Cardinals defense. And I think Derek Carr was kind of just trying to force feed the ball to Davante Adams. I think that won't be the case as much going forward. Now, obviously, you want to throw the ball to Davante Adams, but I just don't think he's going to force the ball to him. That one interception he threw to Davante Adams, there was no reason to throw that fucking ball. It's just Derek Carr had way too much trust in Davante Adams. I don't think he's going to be throwing crazy balls like that going forward, because that's not really Derek Carr's game. He's not someone that throws that kind of a crazy ball. So I think this week up against the Arizona Cardinals, we see a big bounce back matchup for Monsieur Derek Carr. Next up, we move to number 7, Joe Shiesty, Joe Burrow. Now, despite throwing 4 fucking interceptions up against the Steelers, this man still scored 22 fantasy points and finished as the number 6 quarterback at the end of the week. Again, this guy threw 4 interceptions and he was still quarterback number 6. At the beginning of this game, the Joe Burrow Cincinnati Bengals offense looked flaccid. They looked atrocious, and somehow, by the time the game was over, they almost won the game, despite them turning the ball over so often, and Joe Burrow getting laid on his ass repeatedly by the Steelers defense. So overall, while the game started off bad, it was an overall impressive bounce back for Joe Burrow, and even in his bad games, he's still doing pretty good. And he also rushed the ball a little bit more than we saw last season, 6 rushes for 47 rushing yards, which we knew Joe Burrow had in him. I think last year he just wasn't running because he got so hurt the year prior. I think Joe Burrow is in for a solid matchup up against Dallas in Jerry's world. The Dallas Cowboys just didn't seem to have any answers to the Bucs last week, and things are looking even worse now without Mr. Dickie Dak Prescott. Quarterback numero 8, we have Mr. You Like That, Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the Eagles in Philadelphia, up against the Packers. Kirk Cousins looked great. 23 completions, 32 attempts, 277 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, quarterback 12 at the end of the week. Now, Kirk Cousins basically did all of that by just force-feeding the ball to Justin Jefferson, because Justin Jefferson was always open. Justin Jefferson had a fantastic showing. Adam Thielen, Irv Smith, who we're going to talk about in the tight end section of today's video. Dalvin Cook didn't really do much. Dalvin Cook had the best day out of the 3. Irv Smith had a fucking goose egg. Okay? So Kirk Cousins, I think, is going to spread the ball around a little bit more in this game. Also up against the Eagles, like I talked about with Jalen Hurts, I think this could definitely be a pretty high-scoring back-and-forth matchup. So I definitely like Kirk Cousins this week. Again, not screaming to the mountaintops about him because Kirk doesn't really have any rushing upside, but if this is a back-and-forth affair, he doesn't really need the rushing upside if he could potentially put up 4 touchdowns up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Next up, we move to quarterbacks 9 through 16, headlined by Mr. Matthew Stafford, quarterback of the LA Rams, going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Matthew Stafford and this Rams offense put up a snooze fest on Thursday Night Football to kick off the year up against the Buffalo Bills. Matthew Stafford looked bad. 29 completions, 41 attempts, 240 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. Quarterback fucking 29 at the end of the week. I do expect a bounce back, though. This Atlanta Falcons defense is very bad, so I think Stafford gets back on the saddle and puts up a solid performance up against the Falcons. At number 10, we have the king of the strip club, Trey Lance, quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, these 49ers quarterbacks, little horny. Now, we remember Jimmy Garoppolo goes on that date with the porn star. Trey Lance was allegedly at the strip club an hour after the game ended in Chicago. Very impressive that he was able to not only get out of the stadium in an hour, that he did press, took a shower, got dressed, was with the team, and then gets to the strip club. I don't think that video was actually taken after the game, but that narrative is significantly funnier than, oh, here's just a video of Trey Lance from a couple months ago at the strip club, right? That's just not as funny, and I assume everyone's seen that video. If you have not seen the video, just look up Trey Lance strip club. That's how you'll see the video. So, number 1, last week, Trey Lance was awful up against Chicago. The stats, 1 interception, 164 passing yards, 13 completions on 28 attempts, but I will continue to bang the drum for this. Trey Lance was in weather that was fucking atrocious. You would not have expected Trey Lance to do very good in that game the second you saw the weather. I told everyone to sit a lot of these Niners players and a lot of the Chicago players. So, if you saw the weather and you watched the game, you'd realize that Trey Lance really stood no chance. So Trey Lance, whatever he did last week, it's okay. This week he gets Seattle. Now it is projected to rain, but what I've read is it's light rain. It's not 6 inches of rain. It's not torrential fucking downpour monsoon. So Trey Lance will be just fine. Don't cut the leash on Trey Lance yet, because the rushing upside is really there. He rushed 13 times last week. Again, don't worry too much about the stats, but hey, he did do that. Tampa Bay Tom Brady. Did you guys see that picture, quarterback 11, of Tom Brady looking like he lost 1,000,000 pounds on his face? I'm going to try to make the face he made. See, he was looking like that with his cheek. Now, if you're watching a podcast, that's great podcasting, but his cheeks were like sucked completely in. It was insane to see. He looked very weird. Against Dallas last week, 18 of 27, 212 passing yards, 1 touchdown, an interception, quarterback 26. Didn't really have to do much to win that game. That was one of the most boring games. That was the most boring game last week, at least in that weird game in the rain for Trey Lance and the Chicago Bears. At least it was cool because it was raining. This is in Jerry's world in a fucking dome, and Tom Brady didn't have to do anything. They just won easily. Now, going up against the New Orleans Saints, this has proven to be a tough matchup for old man Tom Brady. So, and especially without Chris Godwin, with Evans a little bit banged up, I'm not as confident in Brady in this matchup. Brady, if you wanted to start Rodgers over him, I wouldn't judge you about that. But if you were really talking about, oh, I want to play Wentz or Tua ahead of him, I think you're a little bit fucking crazy. I think Tom puts up a decent performance here. It's not really about the fact that Tom Brady is bad against New Orleans. It's just the fact that New Orleans kind of has their number. And after games where Tom Brady doesn't really put up a lot of points, the offense in Tampa doesn't put up a lot of points, typically they bounce back in a big way. Now, I guess this goes up against the, oh, they're playing the Saints narrative, but we saw Mariota do pretty decent against the Saints last week, so I think Tom Brady will be just fine. Quarterback number 12, we got Mr. Aaron Rodgers. Now, these quarterback numbers are a bit inflated. Normally, Brady's used to some deflation because Mahomes and Herbert were ranked so high. Obviously, they already played, so that's why they're not in the rankings. I think I said that at the beginning of the video. But Aaron Rodgers, QB 12, went up against Minnesota last week. He looked awful. Scored 5 fucking fantasy points. Last year, he started off terrible against the Saints. It literally looked like Aaron Rodgers had no idea how to play quarterback, like he was doing the Bird Box challenge, where you remember that from a couple of years ago from that Netflix show where they have like bandanas covering their eyes. I've never seen the show because I guess some monster attacks you if you look at the fucking monster. That's what Rodgers was doing. He couldn't see anything. He looked awful against New Orleans. He looks awful against Minnesota last week, but he always bounces back. And now he's playing the Bears. And we all know Aaron Rodgers is a part owner of the Bears. This guy always destroys the Bears. So no need to worry for Mr. Aaron Rodgers. If he has a bad game here, though, then it's time to panic. At number 13, we got Carson Wentz, who surprised many, including myself, last week with a solid performance up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 27 completions on 41 attempts, 313 passing yards, 4 tugs, 2 interceptions, 30 fantasy points. Quarterback 3 at the end of the week. A great matchup up against Jacksonville. Now he gets another solid matchup up against the Detroit Lions in what could be a very high-scoring matchup. Vegas has this projected as one of the highest point totals on the week, so I definitely expect Carson Wentz to show up yet again. Hopefully he gets Terry McLaurin a little bit more involved this week, though. Again, I think Carson Wentz is extremely safe, but once he starts getting tougher matchups, don't want anything to do with Carson Wentz, who I honestly don't think is very good, but maybe he turned the page, a new leaf. Didn't look great in Indy. Maybe he was made for this Riverboat Ron system. At number 14, we got famous Jameis W. Winston, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, going up against the Bucs last week, up against Atlanta, even with Taysom Hill coming into the game and fucking with him a little bit. He had 23 completions, 34 attempts, 269 passing yards. Very nice, I like. 2 touchdowns, 22 fantasy points, quarterback numero 7 at the end of the week. The Bucs defense is definitely tough. I will give that to them, right? The Bucs defense is pretty solid, but there's a big but like fucking Mia Malkova here. Jameis Winston, he'll be just fine. He'll be just fine. The Saints offense is legitimately good. They have so many weapons to use. Kamara's health is up in the air. Kamara may miss on Sunday. Again, as I'm recording this on Saturday, we have no confirmation if he's going to play or not. But that is something to monitor. I think that would hurt Jameis slightly, but wouldn't make me move Jameis back any further, right? Like, I'm not as confident if Jameis doesn't play. All right, obviously, if Jameis doesn't play, that's bad. But if, what I meant to say was if Alvin Kamara doesn't play, then yes, I would be slightly more worried, but I'm not going to move him behind Matt Ryan or Tua Tagovailoa. So, next up, speaking of Matty Ice Baby, we go to Matt Ryan. Now, Matt Ryan last week, in a cupcake matchup, finishes as quarterback 19 against Houston. Gets another soft matchup up against Jacksonville. This man, Matt Ryan, had to throw 50 times to tie the Houston Texans. Wow. Again, bad look for Matt Ryan, but up against Jacksonville, I mean, he's incredibly safe, and he definitely has a decent amount of upside. Quarterback number 16, we got Tua turn of the ball over, as people call him. My guy, Tua Tagovailoa. Week 1 up against New England. Did not really do much, right? He didn't look amazing, but I do think that Tua is better than what we saw last week. I really do believe that. I mean, he played all right, like not good for fantasy, but all right in real life, right? 23 completions on 33 attempts, 270 passing yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, 15 fantasy points. But I really do believe that New England just didn't, like, Tua didn't have to do much to win that game. Kind of similar to Tom Brady up against the Cowboys. Now, I'm not saying Tua's as good as Tom Brady, but you get what I'm saying, right? The Patriots' offense was awful. So Tua didn't have to make any crazy throws. Didn't have to force feed the ball to Tyreek Hill 40 yards deep down the field. Now up against Baltimore, an offense that is real, an offense that's a legitimate threat, maybe Tua has to air the ball out a little bit more. I'm interested to see how Tua progresses throughout the season, because I do think that Tua will eventually become a legitimate starter that you want to play on your team every single week. Next week he plays the Bills, so that's a little concerning, but maybe up against Cincy, Minnesota, some games that are coming up that could be back and forth games that could be really beneficial towards Tua Tagovailoa putting up a very big performance in fantasy football. Closing out the quarterbacks, we move to Marcus Mariota of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the LA Rams this week in LA. Marcus Mariota, top 10 quarterback last week up against New Orleans. Obviously, that matchup on paper wasn't the best. This matchup up against the Rams in LA isn't the best, but I do think the Rams defense is significantly better than they looked last week. And once we get into this range, quarterback 17, 18, 19, 20, do you really want to be starting these guys? Most likely not. Number 18, we got Justin Fields, quarterback of the Chicago Bears. Now, that's a joke. I don't actually think he's a bust. We've only seen him play for 1 year. But up against the Niners, again, throw the stats out the window. I don't care that he was quarterback 23. I think Justin Fields is actually pretty decent, but this matchup up against the Packers is always a legitimate nightmare for the Chicago Bears. And again, Justin Fields, we're in the range of quarterbacks I don't really want to be starting. Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. The only hope for Jared Goff is that this game does end up shooting out up against the Washington Commanders, because the Commanders looked really good last week. So did the Detroit Lions. 21 of 37 for Jared Goff up against the Eagles, 215 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, quarterback number 18. Again, Jared Goff is nothing flashy. He's never going to be a top 5 quarterback. he will encroach on being like quarterback 9, 10, 11, or 12 every couple of weeks. So there's a lot worse starts than Jared Goff, but again, far from ideal. And quarterback number 20, we got Baker Mayfield of the Carolina Panthers going up against the New York Football Giants. Now, last week, even though the game didn't look so hot for Baker Mayfield, he finishes as quarterback number 13 with 19 fantasy points, 16 of 27 for 235 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 INT. I think he actually played worse up against the Browns than he will normally play in fantasy football, because I think the revenge game narrative got to his head. He was worried that if he doesn't perform, if he doesn't beat the Browns, it's a bad look on him. He makes the game out to be way more than it was. That's why they lose. I think up against the Giants, they come out and they eat the W here. They win the game. Could be wrong, but I do think Baker Mayfield is still a pretty decent fantasy football start. Now we pivot to the tight end rankings, but before we can do so, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. They've been on your screen the entire video. Are your best ball teams already cooked? Head on over to Underdog Fantasy to resurrect them with their week 6 through 17 best ball tournament. The entry fee is only $10 with $500,000 in total prizes and $100,000 to first place. All you got to do is draft your team and that's it. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management. You don't even have to set your lineup, because Underdog will give you your best score at the end of each week of the season. Underdog also features daily and best ball contests for MLB, NBA, PGA, and NHL, so you can get action all year long. It's not just an NFL website. Click on the link in the video description down below, or use promo code Stokastic, STOKASTIZ, to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100 with Underdog. So you deposit $100, you want to do this best ball resurrection, that's 10 free entries into the best ball resurrection tournament. So back on into things. Number 1 tight end, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens going up against the Miami Dolphins. Last week up against the Jets in MetLife, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 52 yards, 8 fantasy points. Tight end number 12. Obviously up against the Jets, you expect a much better performance out of Mark Andrews as well as out of Lamar Jackson. Devin Duvernay scores 2 touchdowns. I don't think the likelihood of that happening, again, is very high. I think Mark Andrews is one of the most talented tight ends in the NFL, and he always has to be at top of the rankings, and the Dolphins aren't the greatest up against the tight end position. At number 2, we got Darren Waller, tight end of the Las Vegas Raiders, going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Last week, up against the Chargers, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 79 receiving yards, 10 fantasy points. Tight end number 9. Again, not a great performance. It really did seem like Derek Carr was force-feeding the rock to Devontae Adams up against the Arizona Cardinals. Again, this on paper does look like a very high-scoring matchup, and I think Darren Waller should be able to get it done again. These are both guys we talked about, Andrews, Waller. We're going to talk about Pitts next, number 3. All guys that you drafted very high in your fantasy draft, and just because of one not super fantastic game, you're not going to sit any of these guys. Kyle Pitts last week, and when I say not a super fantastic game, Kyle Pitts shit the bed. He took a shit directly on your chest and smeared it all over. 7 targets, 2 receptions, 19 receiving yards, 3 fucking fantasy points. Tight end 36, Kyle Pitts. What the fuck, man? Now he gets the Rams, another tough matchup, but you're not sitting him. You can't sit him. He was still targeted 7 times. The balls weren't the best thrown his way, but he's going to bounce back. I'm not too worried about Kyle Pitts. Number 4, we got Dallas Goedert, tight end of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, it does appear that A.J. Brown is going to consume a large target share in this offense. Shocking, right? You trade the picks for the guy, you give him all this money, they're going to throw him the ball. Very shocking. But Goddard still involved. 4 targets, 3 receptions, 60 receiving yards, 10 and 13, 8 fantasy points. Again, I think this Vikings game is going to be very high scoring, a very high scoring back and forth affair, which is why I really like Dallas Goedert and moved him up my rankings a bunch. So I'm a big fan of Goddard this week up against the Vikings. At number 5, TJ Hawkinson, tight end of the Detroit Lions, going up against Washington. 7 targets, 4 receptions last week up against the Eagles, 38 receiving yards. Again, Hawkinson is one of those guys that got a decent amount of targets. Like Pitts, doesn't really do much. But again, I'm not panicking. I like Knox as a player. I think he's very talented. And again, I think this is another game that I expect to be very high scoring. So obviously not all these games are going to end up as high scoring, right? But this game I hope could be high scoring. And Hawkinson is clearly involved in this offense. Swift should be good to go, which does somewhat hurt Hawkinson because Swift just gets a bunch of targets in this offense. Next up, we move to tight end Dawson Knox. One time if you're with me now. Dawson Knox. Last week, people were coming for my throat, coming for blood. 2 targets, 1 reception, 5 receiving yards, 1 fantasy points. 1 fantasy point, not even fantasy points. Okay, he had a bad game. They paid the guy $1 zillion before that Thursday Night Football game. They want to get him involved. One game where he doesn't do the best isn't going to make me drop Dawson Knox or try to play fucking Cole Kmet or something. I'm playing Dawson Knox, and I'm playing him with supreme confidence up against Tennessee. Think he bounces back and scores a tug in this game. Tight end number 7, Dalton Schultz. This is where I start to worry. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 62 receiving yards, 10 fantasy points, tight end number 10. Now, it is entirely possible that Cooper Rush uses the tactic of, let's just throw to the 2 best guys. Let's just throw the ball to Lamb. If I throw it near him, he'll potentially catch it. Schultz, more of a safety valve. I'm going to throw it to him. He'll catch it too. I hope that's the case. I am definitely worried about Schultz this week. Last week, going into the week, I was very confident in him. Again, 7 receptions, I should say, on 9 targets, 10 fantasy points, tight end 10. He was decent. I don't feel as confident this week up against the Bengals because Cooper Rush is the quarterback. But again, I'm not overwhelmingly panicking and starting some bum at tight end over Dalton Schultz. Final tight end inside of the top 8, Zach Ertz. Last week scores a touchdown, kind of the savior of his game. 4 targets, 2 receptions, 14 yards. Tight end number 7, but he was banged up going into the game, so I didn't really expect all that much out of him anyways. I think if he is more healthy this week, he should have a better game. And again, yet another game where I think it's going to be high scoring. Dalton Schultz. That game, I don't think it's going to be very high scoring, at least by the Dallas Cowboys. Now we move to tight ends 9 through 16. At number 9, we got Tyler Higbee, who commanded a very large target share in that offense. Got a lot of targets for the Rams. 11 targets, 5 receptions, 39 receiving yards. Tight end 17, again, another case where the ball was thrown to him. Didn't necessarily go his way, didn't catch the balls, had a drop, I believe, in that game as well. But that was up against the Bills defense. Now they face up against the hot garbage Atlanta Falcons defense, so you better expect a bounce-back game out of Higbee, who's extremely safe because of how much Stafford likes to throw the ball to him, especially in the red zone. Tight end, numero 10, Cole Kmet. Again, take the stats. 1 target, puts up a fucking goose egg last week up against the 49ers. Take those stats, dribble them around like you're Stephen Curry, and shoot them out the goddamn window because Cole Kmet doing nothing last week does not change my opinion at all. The Chicago Bears barely have any weapons. They don't have anyone to throw the fucking ball to aside from Darnell Mooney, so Cole Kmet is going to be just fine up against the Packers. Tight end number 11, Pat Freiermuth, tight end of the Pittsburgh Steelers, up against the Bengals. 10 targets, 5 receptions, 75 yards, 10 fantasy points. Tight end finished number 8 at the end of the week in half PPR. Now, Freiermuth is another one of those guys that is extremely safe. He's going to see a lot of targets. If Kissin' Titties Mitchell Trubisky looks better, then maybe Pat Freiermuth could even score a touchdown up against the Patriots. The Patriots defense didn't look all that great last week, but neither did the Steelers offense, so this could be an incredibly low-scoring game, though I do think Freiermuth sees enough targets for him to be considered a top 12 tight end. At number 12, we got Big Bob Tonyan, tight end of the Green Bay Packers last week. 5 targets, 3 receptions, 36 receiving yards, 5 fantasy points, and tight end 24 at the end of the week. Now, I've talked about this narrative all summer long about the fact that I believe that, and it's pretty clear that Aaron Rodgers relies heavily on chemistry. He will throw the ball to you because he believes in you, because he's thrown the ball to you before. Robert Tonyan and Aaron Rodgers have a great connection. They've got that 5G LTE. And I think Robert Tonyan's going to get more and more healthy as the season progresses. And again, up against the Bears, whose defense I don't think is very good, Robert Tonyan could potentially have a field day. Now we are about to approach tight ends where your butthole's pretty tightened if you have to play these guys. Seems like the Broncos want to utilize a tight end, Alberto, tight end 13, but it seems like they want to utilize a myriad, is that the correct word? A shit ton of, maybe a better word, or 2 words, of tight ends. They want to utilize a bunch of tight ends. Denver Broncos tight end, Alberto, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 33 yards. Tight end 22. Think the upside is there for Alberto up against Houston. I love the matchup. Again, I just don't feel super confident in him. Tight end 14, Hunter Henry. Last week, he did his best John Cena impression because you couldn't see him, man. 3 targets, 2 receptions, 20 receiving yards, 3 fantasy points. Tight end 35, though the Dolphins' defense might be incredibly tough. That could be the case. This week, he faces the Steelers. Hunter Henry last year was so good because of the touchdowns. This offense in New England looks awful. Matt Patricia does not know how to call plays. Things might be incredibly bad in New England. Mac Jones almost got fucking sawed in half in that game. We'll see what happens going forward, but I think you can start Henry. But again, he needs that touchdown to be somewhat valuable. Tight end 15, Hayden Hurst of the Bengals. 8 targets, 5 receptions, 46 receiving yards, 7 fantasy points. Tight end number 14. Hurst is going to be one of those guys that's going to just be in the top 16 every week. If somehow he scores and gets more targets, then I don't think he's going to get 8 targets every week. But if he gets like 5, 6 targets a week, catches 4 balls, scores a touchdown, you're going to be happy. If not, he didn't screw you over because the Bengals offense is so good and he's going to get targets, but he's also never going to really take you over the top. That's kind of just how I feel about a guy like Hayden Hurst. Tight end number 16 to close out the top 16. David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. 1 target, 1 reception, 7 yards, 1 fantasy point. Not very good. Jacoby Brissett looked better than I thought he would, but this offense's game plan is clear. It is crystal clear. Run, run, run the ball gently down the stream. Just keep running. 9-inch Nicholas Chubb, you get the ball. Kareem Hunt, you get the ball. Just run. Like, until Deshaun Watson's back, let's just run the ball. That's what they're going to keep doing. So Njoku really scares me, even though I think he's a good player. Tight end 17, Easy E, Evan Ingram. And I think we should just give a round of applause for Evan Ingram. The guy didn't drop the ball last week. 4 targets, 4 receptions, 4 for 4, like he was at Wendy's. 28 receiving yards, 5 fantasy points, tight end 27. This Jaguars offense seems interesting. They actually look pretty decent, but Evan Ingram doesn't seem to be a crucial part of this game plan, it appears. They want to give the ball to the running backs, James Robinson, as well as Travis Etienne, and they want to give the ball to Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. I didn't mention Evan Ingram's name. Evan Ingram's name I did not mention because he wasn't super involved. So I don't really want anything to do with them. These are the tight end range where it's really just dead. Like, I'm not excited at all for any of these guys. Irv Smith, goose egg last week, 2 targets. So I think the offense is always going to be like that? No, of course not. But did that excite me to start him? No. So tight end 18, 19. We got Logan Thomas against Detroit. Looked decent. Carson Wentz looks good. I think as Logan Thomas gets more healthy, he's one of these guys that needs to progress, get more healthy. I think he could be a lot better than what we saw last week. So 6 targets, 3 receptions, 45 yards. Think he can build on that. He was tight end 20 last week. Got him at tight end 19 this week. And to close out the top 20, we got Austin Hooper. 2 targets, 1 reception, 6 yards. Hooper seems like a guy that is going to be a red zone specialist. If he does not score, you are not happy with Hooper. Very similar to Hunter Henry. But the Titans offense looked really bad too, so we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I don't think that offense is always going to look that bad, but this week they get Buffalo, so not the best. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure you hit that like button down below as well as that subscribe button. It would help me out a ton. And if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at notorious FNTSY. If you have any questions about week number 2 fantasy football, make sure you ask them down below in the comment section. I love you guys all so much. Check out Underdog Fantasy, promo code Stokastic. Have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, goodbye.